Elena Carter never expected her new job to change her life until she mistook the ruthless billionaire CEO, Adrian Blackwood, for an IT technician. What began as a simple misunderstanding soon turned into an intoxicating game of hidden identities, undeniable attraction, and a love so powerful it defied all odds. Elena Carter stood at the entrance of SilverTech Industries, her heart pounding as she took a deep breath. This was her chance, a stable job, a fresh start, a step towards securing her mother's future. Dressed in a simple yet elegant blouse and a fitted pencil skirt, she clutched her bag tightly, whispering a silent prayer. As she stepped inside, she marveled at the sheer grandeur of the place. The gleaming floors reflected the morning sun streaming through the glass walls, and employees bustled around in crisp suits. Everything about the company screamed excellence. "I just need to do my job well and stay out of trouble," she reminded herself. But fate had other plans. Eleanor had barely settled at her desk when her computer screen froze. She let out an exasperated sigh. Of all the days... She glanced around, searching for someone from IT. Just then, a tall man in a fitted navy blue shirt and dark jeans walked past her. He had an air of effortless confidence, yet something about his demeanor seemed approachable. Assuming he was from the IT department, given his casual attire, Eleanor quickly called out, "Excuse me, my system just crashed. Could you fix it?" Adrian Blackwood, the enigmatic CEO of SilverTech Industries, had intended to check on the progress of a new cybersecurity upgrade. But instead, he found himself halted by a woman with fiery determination in her eyes. For a moment, he was taken aback. No one ever ordered him around, especially not a new hire. Employees usually trembled in his presence or tried too hard to impress him. But this woman... She had no idea who he was. Intrigued, Adrian glanced at her system and then at her. "You want me to fix your computer?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. Eleanor crossed her arms. "Well, that is your job, isn't it?" A slow, amused smirk curled at Adrian's lips. He could have corrected her right then, but something about her intrigued him. Her confidence, her oblivion to his identity, the way she spoke without hesitation. He hadn't been spoken to like this in years. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's see what we're dealing with." As Adrian leaned over her desk, their proximity sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. She hadn't expected the IT guy to be so distractingly handsome. His scent, an intoxicating mix of fresh cedarwood and musk, lingered in the air between them, making her stomach flutter. He studied the screen, fingers moving across the keyboard effortlessly. "You really did a number on this," he teased. Eleanor huffed, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "It wasn't my fault, it just froze." "Uh-huh." Adrian glanced at her, noticing how her frustration only made her more endearing. There was a feistiness in her that made him want to push her buttons just to see how she'd react. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, his dark, piercing gaze locking onto hers. A warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar yet strangely thrilling. "Why is my heart racing? He's just fixing my computer." She looked away quickly, focusing on the desk while he continued typing. Adrian, on the other hand, found himself inexplicably drawn to her. There was something refreshing about the way she interacted with him, without fear, without pretension, just raw, unfiltered personality. "There," he finally said, straightening up. "All fixed." Eleanor exhaled in relief. "Thank you. She squinted at his chest, searching for a name tag. Finding none, she tilted her head. "What's your name?" Adrian hesitated. He should have told her the truth, but he wasn't ready to shatter this moment of normalcy. So instead he smirked and said, "Adam." "Adam," she repeated, nodding. "Well, thanks, Adam. You're a lifesaver," he chuckled. "Any time." As he turned to leave, he could feel her gaze lingering on him. And for the first time in a long while, Adrian Blackwood, powerful billionaire, ruthless businessman, felt something stir deep within him, an emotion he couldn't quite name yet. Eleanor shook her head as she watched Adam walk away. There was something about him, Something different. She wasn't sure what, but she knew one thing: she wanted to see him again. Meanwhile, Adrian made his way to his office, his mind still replaying their interaction. He had met countless women, socialites, models, business executives, all vying for his attention. But Elena Carter? She didn't even know who he was, and yet she had managed to captivate him. Maybe he should let her keep believing he was just an IT guy. For a little while longer. Adrian Blackwood couldn't shake her from his thoughts. Elena Carter, the woman who had unknowingly ordered the billionaire CEO to fix her computer. The way she had spoken to him, direct, unfiltered, unafraid, was something he wasn't used to. Most women in his world wore masks. They either worshipped his wealth or feared his power. But Eleanor, she didn't care about either. To her, he was just Adam, the IT technician. Adrian knew he should correct her mistake, but a strange thrill ran through him every time she looked at him as just another employee. No special treatment, no expectations, just a man in her presence. And so, he let the lie continue. Elena soon realized that Adam always seemed to be around. Whether it was fixing a stubborn printer, assisting another employee, or simply passing by her desk with that infuriatingly charming smirk, he was there. And the more she saw him, the more she noticed him. The way his sleeves were always rolled up, revealing strong forearms, the way his deep-set eyes gleamed with amusement whenever she complained about work, the way his voice carried a smooth, rich timbre that sent warmth curling in her stomach. And the worst part? She was starting to like it. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself struggling with the office coffee machine. It beeped, flashed, and stubbornly refused to cooperate. She sighed in frustration. Need some help? That voice. She turned to see Adrian, leaning casually against the counter, watching her with that same teasing glint in his eyes. She groaned. Let me guess. IT guy to the rescue again? He grinned, stepping closer. Well, I do have a way with machines. Oh, really? What's your secret, sweet-talking them? Adrian smirked. Something like that. But I prefer to think of it as understanding what they need. Eleanor felt an unexpected shiver at his words. Why did that sound so much like a flirtation? She stepped back slightly, trying to ignore the way his presence affected her. Well, if you're such an expert, then fix it. He held her gaze for a beat too long before finally turning to the machine. Within seconds, the beeping stopped, and fresh coffee began pouring into the cup. Elena crossed her arms. Unbelievable. Adrian handed her the cup. What can I say? I'm just good with my hands. The moment those words left his mouth, Elena felt heat rush to her cheeks. Was he flirting? Was she imagining it? She took the cup, keeping her tone neutral. Right. Well, congratulations, Mr. IT Wizard. You just saved the office from a caffeine crisis. He chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Glad to be of service. As he walked away, Eleanor stared after him, her heart drumming in her chest. This was dangerous. She had come here to work, to build a career, not to develop feelings for a colleague. But the way her stomach fluttered whenever he was near, she couldn't deny it. She was attracted to him. A week later, Eleanor stayed behind to finish an urgent report. Most of the office was empty, the only sounds being the rhythmic clicking of her keyboard and the faint hum of the air conditioning. She stretched, massaging the back of her neck, when a voice startled her. You should take breaks, you know. She turned, and there he was, Adam, standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee in hand. Her lips parted in surprise. What are you still doing here? Adrian shrugged, walking toward her. I could ask you the same thing. He placed 1 cup in front of her. Thought you could use this. Eleanor hesitated before taking it. Thanks. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, watching her intently. You always work this late? She sighed. Sometimes. I don't want to mess up. This job is important to me. Something in her voice made Adrian's chest tighten. There was determination, but also a hint of exhaustion. Why? He asked softly. She hesitated before answering. My mother is sick. I support her. This job, it's stability. And in my world, stability is a luxury. Adrian hadn't expected that answer. He had spent his life surrounded by wealth, never having to worry about money. But Eleanor? She had fought for everything she had, and that only made him admire her more. "You're stronger than you think, Eleanor." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his. There was something in his tone, something warm, something reassuring. It made her feel seen. For a long moment they just sat there, the silence stretching between them, not awkward, not forced, just existing in the same space, breathing the same air. Then, almost without thinking, Adrian reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Elena froze. Her breath hitched. Her skin tingled where his fingers had just touched. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, she realized something terrifyingly undeniable. She wasn't just attracted to him, she was falling for him. Adrian pulled back slowly, clearing his throat. He had not meant to do that, but the moment had gotten away from him. He had seen the way her lips parted, the way her chest rose with shallow breaths, the way the air between them crackled with something unsaid. And it was dangerous, because she wasn't just a random woman. She was his employee. And he was lying to her about who he really was. He stood abruptly. "I should go." Elena blinked, as if coming out of a trance. "Yeah, okay." She watched as he turned and walked away, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. She didn't know what had just happened between them. All she knew was that it felt real, and it scared her, because for the first time since she started this job, she wasn't just worried about her career, she was worried about her heart. The next morning, Eleanor entered the office feeling different. She wasn't sure if it was because of the late-night coffee moment with Adam or the way her heart still fluttered at the thought of him. It wasn't just attraction anymore. She liked him. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He was just an IT technician, and she was here to build a career, not fall for a co-worker. She had worked too hard to get here. But despite her logical reasoning, her heart refused to listen. The universe, however, had plans of its own. That afternoon, the entire office buzzed with excitement. There was going to be an exclusive executive meeting, and all employees were invited to attend. "Apparently, the CEO is making a big announcement," one of the assistants whispered. Eleanor barely paid attention. She didn't care much for corporate politics. All she could think about was seeing Adam again. Little did she know her world was about to turn upside down. The meeting was held in the grand conference room on the top floor, a place Elena had never stepped foot in before. The room was huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Employees murmured in anticipation, their eyes glued to the massive glass doors at the front of the room. Elena settled into a seat toward the back, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly, when the doors finally swung open, and her heart stopped beating. Walking through those doors wasn't some elite board member. It wasn't some billionaire CEO she had never seen before. It was him. Adam. Number, not Adam. Adrian Blackwood, the CEO of SilverTech Industries. Her breath hitched. Her entire body froze. She blinked, thinking maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. But there he was, standing at the front of the room, commanding attention, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. Gone was the casual IT guy she had joked with. Gone was the playful smirk. This man was different. He exuded authority, power, control. And he was looking right at her. Elena's stomach dropped, her fingers curled around the edge of her seat, her chest tightening with a mix of shock, betrayal, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. He had lied to her, all this time. He wasn't just a co-worker. He wasn't just Adam, the IT technician. He was the billionaire CEO of the company she worked for. And she had fallen for him. Elena barely heard what Adrian was saying. Her heart was thundering in her chest, her skin hot and cold at the same time. How dare he? How dare he pretend to be someone else? How dare he make her feel safe, make her trust him only to have it all be a lie? The realization was a gut punch. Had he been laughing at her this entire time? Had he just been playing a game, enjoying her attention while hiding his true identity? Anger burned in her veins, but beneath the fury was pain, because she had opened up to him, because she had trusted him, and now she felt like a fool. The moment the meeting ended, she rushed out of the room before Adrian could stop her. She needed to get away. Adrian saw her leave, and his heart sank. He had been preparing for this moment. He had known, deep down, that she would eventually find out. But he had been foolish enough to think he could keep up the charade a little longer. The look in her eyes just now, it broke him. He had never cared what people thought of him. His entire life he had been seen as the ruthless CEO, the untouchable billionaire. But for the first time in years, someone's opinion of him mattered, and he had hurt her. He couldn't let her walk away like this. So he went after her. Elena barely made it to the elevator before Adrian caught up to her. "Elena, wait!" She turned on him so fast that he almost stumbled back. Her eyes blazed with fury, her lips trembling with emotion. "How dare you?" she hissed, voice shaking. "How dare you lie to me?" Adrian winced. "I never meant to—" "Don't," she cut him off, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Don't you dare stand here and act like this wasn't all some sick joke to you." His jaw tightened. It wasn't a joke. Then what was it? Her voice broke. Some kind of test? Were you just having fun messing with the stupid secretary who didn't know who you were? Adrian's heart ached at the raw pain in her voice. "No," he said, stepping closer. "It was never like that. He ran a frustrated hand through his hair. I liked being around you, Elena. I liked being someone who wasn't just Adrian Blackwood, the CEO. She shook her head, blinking back angry tears. "You could have just told me the truth." "I know." His voice was hoarse. "I should have, but I didn't because I didn't want to lose this." Her breath hitched. "Lose what?" His gaze softened. "You." Her heart stalled. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he hadn't meant to hurt her, that the moments they had shared had been real. But the truth still stood. He had lied, and she didn't know if she could forgive him. So she stepped back. Adrian felt his chest tighten as she put distance between them. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, before he could say anything else, before he could fix this, she turned and walked away. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood felt truly powerless. Because the woman he didn't mean to fall for was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't know if he'd ever get her back. Eleanor had always believed she was strong. She had faced hardships, heartbreak, and disappointments. She had learned how to fight back, survive, and push through. But nothing had prepared her for this kind of pain. Nothing had prepared her for him. For the past few days, she had done everything in her power to avoid Adrian Blackwood. She ignored his emails, dodged his glances, and refused to be in the same room with him for more than a minute. But despite her best efforts, she could still feel him everywhere. Every time she passed his office, she felt his presence. Every time she caught the faintest trace of his cedarwood scent, her heart betrayed her. Every time she saw him in a meeting, looking as powerful and composed as ever, she thought about the man who had smiled at her like she was the only person in the world. The man who had tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The man who had looked at her with something that felt dangerously like love. And it hurt. Because no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, she knew the truth. She wasn't just angry at Adrian. She was devastated. Because deep down, she missed him. She missed his teasing. She missed their late-night coffee talks. She missed the way he made her feel seen, heard, wanted. And that terrified her more than anything. Adrian Blackwood had never chased after anyone in his life. He was used to being in control, in business, in life, in everything. But when it came to Elena Carter, he felt like he was losing a battle he didn't even know he was fighting. He had tried giving her space, hoping she would come to him when she was ready. But every day that passed without her speaking to him, without her looking at him the way she used to, felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He had thought he could keep his emotions under control. He had thought he could keep her at a distance. But he had been wrong. Because the truth was painfully clear now. He had fallen in love with her, and he wasn't ready to let her go. That evening, long after most employees had left, Eleanor found herself still at her desk, lost in thought. She stared blankly at the report in front of her, but she wasn't reading a single word. Her mind was filled with him, with the weight of what she had felt, and what she still felt. She didn't even notice when someone entered the office until she heard his voice. "You're still here." Her breath caught. She turned around slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she met his intense gaze. Adrian stood by the doorway, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened just enough to make him look devastatingly undone. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair how he could still make her heart race after everything. She forced herself to stay calm. "I had work to do." Adrian didn't move, didn't blink. "Elena." Her name on his lips was almost enough to break her. She turned back to her desk, pretending to focus on her papers. "It's late, Mr. Blackwood. You should go home." He exhaled sharply. "Don't do that." She stiffened. "Do what?" "Don't act like we're strangers." She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay composed. "Aren't we?" Adrian stepped closer, too close. Close enough that she could feel his warmth, his presence wrapping around her like a gravitational pull she couldn't escape. "You know we're not," he said quietly. Eleanor's throat tightened. "You lied to me." "I know." She turned to him then, her eyes flashing with the pain she had been trying so hard to hide. "Why?" Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely conflicted. "Because I didn't want you to treat me differently. Because I didn't want to be just the CEO to you." Eleanor swallowed hard. "And what was I to you?" His eyes softened. "Everything." Her breath hitched. "Elena, He hesitated, then sighed. "I never meant to fall for you." The words hung between them like an open wound. Elena's heart stuttered. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, in his eyes. But was it enough? She shook her head, stepping back. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Adrian." A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he nodded. "I won't ask you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know that everything I felt, everything I said, it was real." She looked away, fighting the overwhelming emotions building inside her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Adrian took another step closer, closing the space between them until she had nowhere to run. "Then let me show you," he said, voice deep, intimate. Her pulse skipped. And then before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, she felt his hand, warm, firm, lifting her chin, forcing her to look at him. His dark eyes searched hers, filled with something raw and unguarded. Then, ever so slowly, he leaned in. Not demanding, not forcing, just a whisper of a question in his touch, in the way his breath fanned against her lips. And for a fleeting moment, Eleanor almost let herself fall. She wanted to close the distance. She wanted to surrender to the pull between them, to the man who made her feel things she never thought possible. But she was still afraid, still unsure. So at the last second she turned her head, his lips brushing against the corner of her mouth instead. It was barely a kiss, barely anything at all. And yet, it left them both breathless. Eleanor stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need. Just don't walk away from me completely." She met his gaze one last time before grabbing her bag and walking away, leaving both of them shaken, uncertain, and still hopelessly drawn to each other. Elena Carter had never felt more conflicted in her life. Days had passed since that almost kiss with Adrian, yet her heart still refused to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel his touch, the warmth of his fingertips grazing her skin, the whisper of his breath against her lips, the way his eyes had burned with a longing so intense it had nearly broken her resolve. She had wanted to kiss him. She had almost let herself fall. But the moment she had pulled away, she had seen the flicker of hurt in his eyes, and it had nearly destroyed her. Because she knew the truth now. She loved him. She loved him in a way that was terrifying, overwhelming, and completely out of her control. But love wasn't always enough, because she still didn't know if she could trust him again. And that was the part that hurt the most. Adrian Blackwood had never been a man who waited. In business, in life, he took control, made decisions, and got what he wanted. But with Elena, things weren't so simple. She had asked for time, and even though it was killing him, he had given it to her. But he couldn't wait forever. Every day without her smile, without the warmth of her voice, felt like an unbearable punishment. And the worst part? He knew he had no one to blame but himself. He had lied to her. He had betrayed her trust. And now he was paying the price. But he wasn't ready to give up on her. Not when she was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. So, he decided to do something he had never done before. He decided to fight for her. It was late in the evening when Eleanor heard a knock on her apartment door. She wasn't expecting anyone, but the moment she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Adrian stood there, drenched from the rain, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, his hair a mess of damp curls, and his dark eyes filled with something so raw, so desperate, so heartbreakingly real that she could barely breathe. "Elena," he murmured, his voice low and strained. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the door for support. "What are you doing here?" Adrian took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I couldn't stay away." Eleanor's heart pounded. "Adrian, I love you." The words hit her like a storm, knocking the air from her lungs. Her lips parted in shock, her pulse skipping erratically, but Adrian wasn't finished. "I love you," he repeated, his voice breaking. "And I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I swear to you, Elena, it was never a game. It was never a lie about how I felt." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "Adrian, I should have told you the truth the moment I met you," he continued, stepping closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Ordinary guy. I wanted that moment to last. I wanted to be just a man in your eyes, not a CEO, not a billionaire. Just a man. Your man." Eleanor's heart ached, her emotions a whirlwind of pain, love, and longing. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to run into his arms and forget everything else, but the fear still lingered. "You broke my trust," she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian nodded, his jaw clenching. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me again." Elena's breath hitched. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, his voice pleading. "Tell me how to fix this. Tell me how to make you believe in me again, because I swear to God, Elena, I will do anything, anything to make it right." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Kiss me." Adrian's entire body tensed. His hands shook at his sides. His breath came out in a shaky exhale. "Elena." She took a step forward, tilting her chin up, her eyes filled with vulnerability and longing. "If you mean it," she whispered, "if you really love me, then show me." That was all it took. Adrian closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, his hands cupping her face, his lips crashing against hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was raw, desperate, filled with every ounce of emotion he had been holding back for weeks. And the moment Elena kissed him back, all the pain, all the doubts, all the fear melted away. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the lies, not the past, just them, together. By the time they pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other's, their hearts beating in perfect sync. Adrian wiped away the tears on her cheeks, his fingers gentle, reverent. "I love you," he whispered again, his voice hoarse with emotion. Elena exhaled shakily, her hands gripping his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. "I love you too," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. Adrian's eyes shone with relief, with hope, with something dangerously close to forever. "Then let me prove it to you," he murmured, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. "Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Elena looked up at him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe again, because despite everything, despite the lies and the hurt, she knew that Adrian Blackwood wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was the man who had captured her heart, and she was finally ready to give him hers in return. Elena Carter had never been in a love like this before. It was consuming, overwhelming, and yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She had spent days convincing herself that she couldn't trust Adrian Blackwood, that he had betrayed her, that what they had was a lie. But that kiss had shattered every wall she had built around her heart, because the moment his lips had met hers, she had felt the truth. It wasn't just desire, it wasn't just attraction. It was love, real, raw, uncontrollable love. But love alone wasn't enough, because she was still terrified. Terrified that if she let herself fall completely, if she trusted him blindly, she would end up broken. And she wasn't sure if she could survive losing him. The next few days were a blur of confusion for Eleanor. She still went to work, still did her job, still interacted with co-workers. But something had changed, because now every time she was in the same room as Adrian, she could feel the weight of his eyes on her. He didn't push. He didn't demand anything from her. But every time their gazes locked, she could see the unspoken words in his eyes. The silent question, "Do you still want me?" And the truth was, yes, she did. More than she had ever wanted anything in her life, but her heart was still tangled in fear. She needed to be sure. She needed to know that this wasn't just a passing infatuation, that he wasn't just chasing after her because she had been the one woman who didn't throw herself at him. She needed to know that he wouldn't break her heart. And so, she kept her distance. Even when it hurt. Adrian Blackwood was losing his mind. He had told himself he would be patient, that he would give her space, that he would let her come to him when she was ready, but every second without her was agony. Every time she looked at him with those big, beautiful, uncertain eyes, his heart clenched, because he could see the battle raging inside her. She wanted him. She loved him. But she was still afraid. And for the first time in his life, Adrian hated that he couldn't fix this with money, with power, with strategy. The only thing he could do was wait, and pray that she wouldn't walk away from him forever. That Friday night, Eleanor found herself standing in front of Adrian's penthouse door. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was racing. She had spent all week fighting herself, trying to convince herself that she could walk away from this, that she could walk away from him. But the truth had hit her like a storm. She couldn't. She didn't want to, because being without him was worse than any fear she had. She took a shaky breath and knocked. The door swung open almost instantly, like he had been waiting for her. And when she saw him, standing there in a simple black t-shirt and sweatpants, looking so different from the powerful, intimidating CEO the world knew, her heart ached. "Elena," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. She swallowed hard. "I need to talk to you." He stepped aside immediately, letting her in. She walked into his penthouse feeling small in the midst of its grandeur, but at the same time, she could feel him everywhere. This wasn't just a cold billionaire's home. It was his home. The place where he slept, worked, lived, breathed. And right now, all she wanted was to be closer to him. Adrian watched her, his entire body on edge. He didn't know why she was here. Did she come to say goodbye? Did she come to tell him she couldn't do this? Because if that was the case, he didn't think he could survive it. "Elena," he said softly, "talk to me." She turned to face him, her hands clutching her coat, her lips trembling. And then, in a voice so broken and so vulnerable, she whispered, "I'm scared." Adrian felt his heart crack open. "I'm scared of how much I love you," she continued, her voice shaking. "I'm scared that if I trust you again, you'll hurt me. I'm scared that if I let myself fall completely, you won't catch me." Adrian took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. His hands reached for hers, gently prying them away from her coat, lacing his fingers through hers. "Elena," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to be scared." She blinked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "How do I know that?" she whispered. "How do I know you won't let me down?" Adrian cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the single tear that escaped. "Because losing you once was enough," he whispered, "and I will never, ever risk it again." Eleanor's breath hitched. His words, his gaze, his touch. They all felt so honest, so real. And just like that, her fear began to fade, because this wasn't just about trust anymore. This was about love, their love, and it was worth the risk. Without another word, Elena surged forward, pressing her lips against his. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with everything they had left unsaid. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of passion, of a love that refused to die. Adrian groaned, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her flush against him, as if he never wanted to let her go. Because he didn't, and he never would. They had fought through pain, lies, and fear. But now they had found each other again, and this time they weren't letting go. Eleanor woke up to the feeling of warm lips pressing against her forehead. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming. But when she opened her eyes, she found herself wrapped in Adrian's arms, his strong chest rising and falling beneath her cheek. The events of last night came rushing back. The kiss, the whispered promises, the way they had held each other as if the world outside didn't exist. She should have felt safe. She should have felt certain. But even as Adrian's arms tightened around her in his sleep, a familiar doubt crept into her heart. Had she made the right choice? Could she really trust him again? What if after everything she was setting herself up for heartbreak? She wanted to believe in this love. But love had never been the problem. Trust was. A silent struggle. Adrian notices the distance. Adrian felt it immediately. She wasn't pulling away physically, but she wasn't fully present either. He could see it in the way she hesitated before reaching for his hand. The way she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she looked at him, like she was still trying to convince herself she had made the right decision. And it killed him. Because he had promised to fix things. He had promised to prove himself. And now he realized that words alone wouldn't be enough. She needed more. She needed to see that he meant it. So he decided to do something he had never done before. He decided to lay his heart completely bare. The grand gesture. A risk worth taking. The next evening, Elena received an unexpected invitation. A formal company gala. She almost didn't go. She didn't feel like dressing up, pretending everything was perfect when her heart was still a battlefield of emotions. But something inside her whispered, "Go." So she went. And what she saw when she arrived took her breath away. The grand hall of the SilverTech Industries annual gala was filled with chandeliers, shimmering decor, and hundreds of elite guests, in their finest attire. But none of that mattered, because standing on the center stage, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, his eyes locked onto hers, was Adrian Blackwood. And in his hands was his company ID badge. Her stomach twisted in confusion as he lifted the microphone, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "I wasn't planning on making a speech tonight," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "But there's something I need to say, something that matters more than any business deal, any success, any amount of wealth." The crowd fell silent. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. "This ID card," Adrian continued, holding it up for everyone to see, "represents everything I've built. It represents power, responsibility, control." He looked straight at Elena. "But none of that matters if I don't have her." A few gasps rippled through the audience, murmurs of confusion and intrigue spreading. But Adrian didn't care. He didn't care who was watching, because this moment was for her. "Elena Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you once asked me who I was to you. And for so long, I was too much of a coward to give you the real answer." He took a deep breath, his hands tightening around the symbolic badge in his grasp. "So, let me say it now." Then, in front of hundreds of people, Adrian did something unthinkable. He ripped off his CEO badge, letting it fall to the ground. Gasps filled the room. Elena's eyes widened in shock. "If I have to choose between being the CEO of this company and being the man who loves you, I choose you." Her breath caught in her throat. "Elena," he whispered, stepping down from the stage, walking straight toward her. "You were never just another person in my life. You were the one who made me feel human again." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "You are the only thing I have ever been truly afraid of losing," he admitted, his voice raw. "And I refuse to lose you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, delicate velvet box. Elena sucked in a breath. He wouldn't. Adrian dropped to one knee. The room fell away. It was just them. Him, her, and the moment that would change everything. "Elena Carter," he said, looking up at her with nothing but love, devotion, and vulnerability in his eyes. "No more lies, no more secrets. Just me, asking you to be mine." Then slowly he opened the box, revealing a stunning, elegantly simple diamond ring. "Marry me?" Eleanor's breaking point, the moment of truth. For a long moment, Elena couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision, her hands shaking. This man, this powerful, untouchable, intimidating billionaire, was kneeling before her, offering her his heart. No pretense, no games, just love. And suddenly the fear that had been haunting her for weeks faded away. Because she knew. She knew. He was hers, and she was his, forever. Tears spilled over as she nodded shakily, her lips trembling with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, stronger, with all the love in her heart. "Yes, Adrian, I'll marry you." A deep, relieved exhale escaped him, and in a second he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms, crashing his lips onto hers. The room erupted in applause, but neither of them noticed. Because in that moment there was only them. Only the love they had fought for. Only the future they were about to build together. And as Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their love with a kiss that was both tender and fiercely passionate, Elena knew. She had finally found her forever.